All right, here we go. We're back on Morning Kick Around. Jason, getting a chance to talk to Dan Vaughn from Protagonist Soccer, a guy that I've run into many times over the years, talking about the state of the game in America. Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you for making some time.
Jason, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We were joking that it looks like we have one wall behind us. We're just in two different locations. It's a good look. It's a good
Thank
look.
you.
The scarves, and I know you've got an eclectic collection like I do. And I know some of that probably comes from what you cover at Protagonist Soccer. So let's start with that. Sort of give me, if you want to do a brief sketch on your origin story and tell me where you come from in terms of soccer and why you talk about what you do, and then what Protagonist Soccer is trying to achieve in American soccer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like a lot of people, I was introduced to soccer in the United States through watching the Saturday stuff on Fox. I watched a lot of Manchester United. It's why I'm a Manchester United fan to this day. Which not a good time to be a Manchester United fan, but that's okay. It was better back then, and then sort of moved that fandom into actually ran an MLS podcast for a little while from a long time ago. This is maybe 10, 12 years ago. I started MLS podcast. And then after a couple of years, and it was through the Open Cup, I discovered that there were other layers of soccer that I was not aware of. And those layers were getting no coverage. And I find underdog stories fun. Those interest me. My approach to journalism often is storytelling. I try to look for interesting people or interesting stories, interesting interconnected aspects of the game. And so I started following lower league soccer, from Division 2 all the way down to your local amateur regional leagues that are happening, even city leagues. And I had a background in journalism from college, and I really love that, trying to expose things that maybe I thought were interesting, and that maybe if people found them, they could also find them interesting. And that's the approach we've taken with Protagonist Soccer over the last almost 10 years now. But it's an approach that we've taken, focusing on the lower league game, the stories, the people, the players, because they don't get a lot of coverage in mainstream journalism. And it's a thing that's grown over time. I would say, if you ask me what my aims were at Protagonist Soccer, it's to broaden the story of soccer in the United States. Just a quick aside, I love soccer history too. The
Mm-hmm.
work of I have a guy that writes with me, Dan Creel, who does a lot of that. And I think it's interesting when you go back to like the 1920s and 1930s, and soccer in the United States was massive, but there's almost zero texture to it now. It's all become box scores, and there's not a lot of stories. We don't know a lot about that.
Yeah.
I want to prevent that from happening now with what's going on in soccer. I think that it's easy to go, oh, US Open Cup round one, this team played, that's the score, let's move on. But like the stories of the players that are playing and the ones that are grinding it out at lower leagues, I find that stuff interesting.
Yeah, I can see the appeal there, and I, again, not this is about you, but just because I think it's important for people to understand, how we connect. I've always, at least in my later radio career, tried to make an effort to cover some of those stories. So you are interesting in that regard because you're doing work that probably isn't as well known. You're covering teams and leagues that aren't well known. And I guess I would be curious. You said you were an MLS fan, or you had an MLS
Mm-hmm.
podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You see all these stories that aren't getting covered. Did you find yourself, and we've already talked off air about being younger men, did you find yourself, I'm going to use a loaded word here, Dad, and if you are offended by this word, feel free to call me out. Were you radicalized in any particular way?
Listen, I think that my own personal politics probably blends into my view of soccer as well. I'm a very pro democracy, grassroots democracy kind of person. And I think that when you see things like that, and then you see the imbalances when it comes to the finances and the investment that's going on at the top level, and how little of that is happening at the lower leagues, I think it's easy to want to be a revolutionary. And I certainly took that approach in the beginning and wanted to burn bridges, and was very critical of, the Don Garber MLS type, and was, I think when I first started, I was very, I went from, again, doing an MLS podcast to sort of like, I hated MLS and didn't want to talk about it and was highly critical of it. And I would say I still am. Um,
Sure.
I don't like a lot of the aspects of the game that it feels like MLS is pushing it towards. But I've also learned over time that making friends and having open conversation about things that we disagree on is actually a good thing. It helps
Sure.
me person broaden my perspective. You know, I would say, man, how could you be a fan of Austin FC and Anthony Precourt? How could you be a fan of that? And the reality is that there are people that live in Austin or have ties to Austin that they see that as their local club. And local
Right.
soccer is something that's certainly something we would promote.
Well, it's also there's and this will become more of a meta conversation about the state of conversation in American soccer, who we are, where we come from, and sort of how we view things. To me, that we are, and I've been this person too on some level at times about maybe in different particular tranches of American soccer, but it becomes a gatekeeping problem, right? It
Sure.
becomes this thing of you're not the right kind of fan, or you don't like the right kind of soccer, or the way you engage with the game is not the way I think people should engage with the game. And then we get extremely judgy. And then we have fights on whatever social media platform we're on in that particular moment. Is that
Mhm.
a fair way to describe sort of where we're at?
I think that people I think have been shaped by the conversations I've had in social media over the last 15 years as social media has become sort of it's been the conduit that a lot of people are having conversations. And social media, because we're limited in characters and because it's a public discussion as compared to a one-on-one discussion, oftentimes degenerates into trying to own each other and to troll each other. And because that gets the most likes, right? That gets the best reactions because people are like, yeah, you
Yeah.
told him. And
Yeah.
the reality is, it's not really pushing the conversation forward very far. And generally, it's just kind of forcing people more into their own tribes as compared to opening the conversation and maybe
Yeah.
finding solutions to move things forward.
Yeah. I think, again, from my perspective, I worked extremely hard to get to where I am. Very much like you, found something I was passionate about, started making something. And through some luck, but also, look, I'm going to say, because I have an ego, some talent, I
Hmm.
managed to put myself in a position where, um, I had something of a platform, or at least I was making a living talking about soccer in America, which I do not take for granted, right? That I have an opportunity to do that. There was a time, and I don't remember specifically us interacting, Dan, although there was it's kind of it's all very murky and cloudy for me. But there was
That's
a
good.
time when I
That's
was
good for me here.
yeah, well, I'm not saying I comported myself in the best manner at all times either, okay? I'm not
Mhm,
pretending to be a saint.
mhm.
I'm just there was a time when it felt like, and again, I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm just trying to I only have my perspective here. There was a time when it felt like it was this idea of, well, you're the establishment, or you, because you get paid to talk about soccer or
Right.
maybe write about it for ESPN or whoever, then you are the bad guy by default because you are part of a machine that supports, in this case, Major League Soccer. And I definitely think that there is a problem we have with this division that happens with, it's not amateur because USL has its
Mhm,
proponents. You certainly cover that. It's more of it's more, again, it's sort of MLS, or what is seen as the billionaire playground, which wasn't 15 years ago. Let's be clear.
mhm.
And then the sort of grassroots. You described it as grassroots, and sometimes I think that's an erroneous distinction to begin with. But do you think that that's part of where we're at too?
I think that you have to draw the line somewhere, right? And I think we're encouraged to draw lines. We're encouraged to draw up battle lines and connect with the people that agree with us and hate the people that we don't agree with. Um but I also think that there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot, like you were talking about, like MLS wasn't always what it is now, and it doesn't mean that's what it will be forever. And I also think that we're seeing changes in USL that are going to lead to different kinds of levels of investment coming too, that we may see some changes there too. So I think that it's complicated, and it's something that changes, and if we're not willing to change, we end
Yeah.
up turning into I don't know. We turn into bots, right? We turn to troll bots, repeating the same lines over and over again.
I mean, a lot of this is a lot of this is a function of the fact that you talked about history and talking about American soccer history that has been lost, and we
Hmm.
have a feature on this show that we haven't done in a while called Memory Hole, and it does feel as though it's really hard to get a grasp on your soccer history because it's a skipping stone across the pond, and we haven't had these
Yeah.
long periods. Our clubs have all changed, died, maybe come back in different forms and all that stuff. And it's really tough to hold on to. I mean, I'm a person who grew up caring very much about baseball, and I can tell you
Mhm.
what year Ted Williams hit 406. I can tell you Joe DiMaggio 56 game hitting streak. I can talk about things that happened 50 years before I was born in cases, but I don't know how soccer was in that time frame because it doesn't connect directly to what we have. I think it's fascinating. I do want, before we run out of time with you,
Mhm.
I do want to talk about a couple of things that are happening out there.
Sure.
How are you covering the USL announcement about the first division and promotion relegation?
I think that it's generating a lot of excitement in the level like we cover at Protagonist Soccer. We dip into championship coverage, and certainly we cover League One and USL League Two, which technically USL League Two is not necessarily involved in that conversation yet. That's the amateur level of the USL pyramid. But it's exciting. I mean, I think that it's the first time that we're going to see this implemented in any real way in the United States. Certainly, you can find promotion relegation in a lot of regional leagues. If you go to like the Bay State Soccer League or Buffalo District, like those are leagues that are like 7, 8, 9 layers deep, and they've got promotion relegation going on.
Hmm.
But this is going to be the first time that we see it at a national level. I think that there's a lot of questions about what it means. And I think it's also important to remember that this is within a closed system. This is not actual true open system promotion relegation where a team could just enter in and play up. Reality is that this is within USL. These are already established teams within USL, and they'll be the ones that are participating in this. But exciting because it's a test case, right? It's going to give us the options. We're going to be able to see how this plays out. I think that as a fan, I'm curious how the fans are going to react. Is it going to be, if you see a team that's in the newly coming and just recently announced USL Premier League, if you see them playing in the Premier League for a season and then dip down to say championship, or maybe in 2 years dip down into USL League One, how will that impact the tickets, the people that are showing up for these games? Because that's the real question. We love the
Hmm.
idea of promotion. Most of us don't think about the realities of relegation.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that I think what's exciting, at least from what we've seen from the reporting that's come out, is that it appears that the owners within USL are dramatically, like that. We heard 90% was the number that we heard voted for this. That shows a level of progressive thinking on the part of USL owners that I think opens a door to a lot of things that we might see coming in the future, because they maybe have a vision that they could do something. They need to find a differentiator, a thing that makes
Yeah.
them different from MLS, especially as they launch that D1 league. You need something to set yourself apart. You can't compete with the payroll and the already established fan bases that these clubs have. So you need to find something that makes you different. And promotion relegation applied at this scale is certainly different.
Are you convinced that this is definitely happening, or is it kind of an article of faith for you at the moment? I mean, look, they're saying it. I'm not saying they're
Sure.
not intentful. There are a lot of steps between now and then.
I think you're right. Right. And I will tell you that as a guy that's covered lower league soccer for a long time, USL has hinted at promotion relegation for as long as I've been doing this.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that the establishment of League One, which happened about 6 years ago, and the announcement of whatever the Premier League is going to look like, which we still don't know what that really is going to look like, sort of, I mean, it feels like it's building towards that. Something I talked about just last night on a podcast is that what you need is a dream and a vision, and then you have to have the people that do the work to get it there.
Yeah.
And USL feels like an organization, at least from the outside looking in, that they do have an idea of what they're moving towards, and we're seeing positive steps towards it. So I guess I'm hopeful, like, in believing in it. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how it's going to operate or how great it's going to be. But the fact that this is a league that's talking about this, pushing this, and it appears to be putting the building blocks together to make it happen, I think it gives a lot of reasons to be hopeful if you're a fan of promotion relegation.
Okay. At the risk of being accused of giving the Open Cup short shrift, let's do a minute or two on the Open Cup, Dan. I mean, we're past that first round stage, and give me a sense of where you think this is, because there are some positive things like amateur teams against professional
Sure.
teams. I think we like that. There's obviously the Major League Soccer participation and the level of that league that is a drain on the tournament.
Yeah, I think that as a guy again that's been around U.S. Open Cup and we always get fired up for those first rounds. It's the same thing as what's happening in March Madness, right? You want to see the underdog take a shot and maybe poke someone in the eye and maybe advance, and maybe we don't expect them to win it all, but we enjoy that. But as far as cup sets, we saw almost the exact same amount as we saw last year. We had 7 last year. We had 6 in this first round this year, and there's I think the one that everyone is looking forward to, and we were talking about this a little beforehand, is that we're going to see a matchup in round 2 of the 2 Chattanooga teams, and that is something that I think a lower league soccer fan could not be more excited about. This test, again, talking about the positives of USL, which we have, the negatives of USL, the territory rights, and a outside investor bought the territory rights in Chattanooga and established the Red Wolves in League One. And it has limited the growth of Chattanooga Football Club coming out of NISA. They had no place else to go other than MLS Next Pro. And there is some deep animosity in Chattanooga between these 2 football clubs. It's the kind of stuff that fans in England would love, or fans in Germany would love. Like, this is like 2 teams in the same city that are vying for fan support for players. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I think any soccer fan would be excited about. I would say maybe the Chattanooga fans less excited about, but I would say from the outside, this is a super fun matchup that would only happen in the Open Cup. It's why the Open Cup is such an awesome competition. It gets all these people playing against each other that you just never see.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that for round 2, but round 1 was great. And we got to see, everyone's favorite burrito club, El Farolito, moved up again. They're going to be on to the round 2. This is a team that gets it. And by the way, was the 2024 Protagonist Soccer Club of the Year, El Farolito. So we're fans of them as well.
Okay, awesome. That is fantastic. A nice snapshot there on your thoughts on the Open Cup. ProtagonistSoccer.com. Anything else you want to tell people before I let you go and get back to the family, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say that if you're a fan of soccer content focused on the lower leagues, he mentioned at protagonistsoccer.com. We also have on Spotify or anywhere else where you're getting podcasts. Protagonist Podcast is the feed for that. All of our podcasts run through that, and we are pushing hard on YouTube content. I mean, following the lead of great soccer minds like Jason Davis here, we're also doing a lot of our shows on our YouTube channel as well, Protagonist Soccer. So please, check it out. And Jason, thank you so much for having me on. Love what you're doing here, and it's nice to be able to talk about a part of soccer that maybe gets ignored a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. You're doing incredible work at Protagonist Soccer. Dan Vaughn, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.